All right. We are live according to all the widgets and buttons up here. So I've got a esteemed group of humans here with me that have all been part of the CompTIA working group. Now, all of the faces are contained on below, but in this series that I'm going to introduce in just a second, we are basically just going to be a come and go. Whichever members of the working group can pop in and run it. Some weeks I will or will not be here. But anyways, so what is this? This is October, which means it is traditionally Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Everybody's aware. We all know it sucks. We have things we need to do. So we are co-opting this month to make it CompTIA Trustmark Working Group Take Action Series Month. And the intention of this is to give you one little actionable item that you can take as an MSP or as a practitioner out there and execute right now in your organization. And then next week, have it done when we come back and report in the chat to us. So if you're here, say hey in the chat. We'll bring it up. But we're going to kick off with it. So, Chris, what is this week's topic? What are we talking about here, brother?
We're talking about security officers or information security officers. And I think it's something that we often overlook. And particularly with smaller companies, we don't tend to think about ourselves as needing to, identify or call out this role.
Yeah. Mark, what are your thoughts on somebody being the sucker? In my opinion, I just didn't walk back fast enough when it was asked if I wanted to be the security director, right? But tell me about that a little bit. Mark P. Menzies, I'm calling you out, bro.
I think he's frozen.
Is he frozen?
He's frozen.
Mark, I'm talking to nobody.
I can tell you what it means to me.
You do it, brother. Go.
Yeah. So I very personal decision. This about 4 years ago had came into an old MSP I'd been in back in and really wanted to establish cybersecurity as a practice, not sell product. And this was the first tackle I had, right? Was we need to define roles, and it can sound simple. It's not. So this is a very personal one for me. I think sucker might be overstating it because I was very gung ho. It's kind of like, I wanted it too. I wanted the challenge, and I was able to take on the challenge. But I was lucky. I had very good relationships inside the company. It's about a 30-person MSP all in all. And so I had great relationships. I was able to push this, but quickly realized there was a lot ahead of me, and figuring out how to do it all and it was a big task. Absolutely.
Chris, you brought this up, and I'm going to go to Dave, but you brought this up 2 years ago when we first started talking about this of Matt. There's a gap in having somebody responsible for this. And what you ended up speaking about came out in NIST CSF 2.0 and got added as an overarching function. And in CIS 8.1, they align with this same function. And everybody knows what it is, but it's the word govern. And the reason that we picked this to be number one, the first thing I want you to do, not the assets, which that's my jam. But number one, right, is because if you don't have somebody directing the will of the company, what governance means to me is the will of the company. It is the executive function of deciding to do what we want to do. If we want to go build a bridge, that is the will of this company, and governance will drive that. So, Chris, when you brought that up, that's why I wanted to do this one first, is go name that person that's executively empowered, that is responsible, and that makes those decisions. And Dave, you struggled with this personally, right? This is one of the things where you're both writing these rules for the working group and then also trying to go through it as an organization. Talk about that a sec, because it came up last week.
Yeah. So we've been on the Trustmark journey for just about a year, or a little more than a year. And I think this is probably the one spot where, who is the information security officer? I mean, should that be the CEO? Is it me? Is it the SysOp that we have on staff? Like who is that right person? And I think a lot of times, the SysOp will come to me and go, "Oh, hey, we should be doing this," and I'm like, "Well, I don't know. We should be doing that." So at first we thought it was a SysOp that should be the ISO, and then we kind of went bandied it back and forth. And I think even in our discussions, we went, back and forth on it. And I think it was what finally kind of was the giveaway was the minute I started saying things like, well, but if we implement it this way, or we do this thing, that was the telltale sign of like, oh, wait, I am the security officer and I don't need to be a SysOp, and I don't need to be, have a bunch of titles after my name like Matt Lee
Right.
does, and
Yeah,
I
he's an
don't.
idiot.
I don't need those things to say, hey, this is the right way to do this, and
True.
and then report that both up and down, right? Because
Yeah.
it's a lot of times being the ISO is all about communicating, right? It's about communicating up to executive leadership, and it's making sure that the staff understands what is it that we're doing and why.
Yeah. So executively empowered, right? The one that's going to make that ultimate executive decision that then becomes the governing arm of saying this is what we're doing. And secondarily, it's that point of being the decision maker and the ownership of that governance, and doesn't always mean you're going to be the idea person. In fact, I was named as the director of security, but our security officer was Tony Miller. Why? Because he was the one making the executive decision. I had a million things I wanted to do. Someone has to make executive decisions for the business, which ones will be done. Mark, you live in this world. Like, this is really kind of your whole jam. Anything to add here on kind of picking an ISO or any of the tales from the crypt, if you will, from it?
I mean, one of the stories I like to use is just internally. Are we still here? Yeah. So one of the stories that
we're here, buddy.
I like to use is just. You can hear me?
Yes. No.
Okay, I'm gonna drop and figure this out.
I think he's on a big delay.
I'm gonna drop and figure this out.
We love you, buddy. We'll catch you next week, man. That's why we got enough of us here. We're all right. I want to touch real quick on Degley's point. We also need to make sure governance is from top to bottom. Yeah, that's the very metric of governance, right? Is that you have to inspect what you expect. Governance is setting someone to own that. You know, and Chris, you brought up before we got started a bunch of stuff on like other aspects that tie into this, right? Like, what are some other things that if you don't have governance, they also fail?
Well, I think the fundamental component here is this: governance and leadership go hand in hand. Governance, will of the company, sure, but like if as a leadership team, your security officer isn't empowered, then your governance fails because leadership has failed, right? And to Dave's point, it's about, it's the clarity in the communication, right? Like, engineers, generally tend to say things that are, buzzwords and acronyms, and not everybody in your organization speaks those, bits and bytes, if you will. And so that clarity is just so important because you need everybody, to what Degley said of governance top to bottom, top to bottom, bottom up, left, right, like everybody has to be able to clearly articulate. And that comes from having one voice through the security officer, really setting the stage for what that looks like. And that's why, to your point, some of the other safeguards that you find in there go along with that. But again, we don't want to go down the rabbit hole of doing all of those other things and have people go, oh man, I ain't doing security officer.
Yeah.
The reality is, and if you look at NYDFS and some of the other frameworks that are out there that have language around what it means to have a security officer or the role of a security officer, it's not meant to be like, oh, go find someone and hire someone that's got 25 years of experience in both worlds of technical and business. It's really just start with making someone responsible at your company. It's no better or worse than having a responsibility matrix, right? Like, sure. If something happens, who do you call? Well, the world around us now says, if something happens, I need to be able to communicate to your security officer. So having one is the starting point.
That's right. And they go ahead, Dave.
No, I was just gonna say, and that it really is. I want to go back to this because being the security officer isn't a technical role at all. Like,
and not necessarily a tactical role or operational role.
You're not doing it. Like,
right?
That was the other thing I came to. It was like, oh, I'm the security officer. I got to do all this stuff now. No, that isn't it. You have to make sure that people are traveling the right road, and that you're talking about, like, if the one task this week was, hey, I'm now the security officer, what should we talk about? That's your job. You're literally doing what a security officer needs to, right? How do I inform and execute on security best practices that make sense for my organization? I'm not saying follow a particular framework or anything else, but what works for your organization. And until you name that person, it's never going to get done ever. Right.
And Dave, they shouldn't. This actually came up today. I'm at a security conference and they were talking about, I won't say what it was because very quickly people would figure out the who. But at any rate, he got hired as a CISO for a financial
Yes,
institution.
I'm with you now. Okay.
And got it. So what was really interesting about what he said is that the first day, the organization is trying to give him the keys to the castle. And I think it's really important to note that this role should not have any keys to anything because of the role that they are now responsible for. It's very dangerous to
I
have those
won't be
keys.
so emphatic as to agree wholeheartedly with that. I would say that they should only be given the appropriate keys for the
Fair.
things that they are doing from a tactical perspective where necessary. So to your point, though, I agree. Like what Chris is saying,
need
they
a
should just
pin.
come in with admin rights. In fact, I should almost never have them. I'm going to
Yeah.
make executive decisions on what choices are made to limit and reduce risk. Right?
They need
to your
that
point.
ink pen though, right? They're the ones that are blessing this going forward. It has to be with one person. It can't just be like, we're all kind of agreeing to this.
Yeah. Oh, this is going to be a hot one. Who wants to start?
Yeah, Degley, great question. I don't want to start though, but it's a great question.
I mean,
That's not fair.
I'll start.
All right,
start.
you always do, buddy.
So really and truly, this needs to be a leader in your organization. It doesn't matter what kind of leader they are, so long as they can lead. I think that is a good choice for the ISO.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be anything else.
You touched on what I was worried was the trip mine, which is, I'll just be their ISO as their MSP. You cannot be the executive function and governance inside their organization. Someone has to own that. Now, you might be an outsourced advisor or a vCISO or whatever that may be, but internally, someone has to own the decisions, ramifications, and benefits of the decisions made around security and risk.
Well, Yeah, and I was going to say, I mean, you hit the nail on the head there. It really is about risk, right? And everybody thinks that like when we talk about risk and frameworks and all this stuff, that it's all about security and protecting and everything else, and it is, but it's also about what's acceptable and what's acceptable to your organization. Because me being an MSP, I might have a lower tolerance for risk than say an architecture firm, right? So but there's got to be somebody at the top that's saying, hey, this is what's important to us, right?
So I think I know the answer, but can I kind of rephrase this question? If you had to choose between,
well, you sure do like cheating for your own benefit, don't you, buddy? I mean, you are just good at that.
In an organization like this, right? If you had to choose between like a security architect, like say a network architect with a CISSP, as you were alluding to, before, they've kind of done their security plus, and like a CFO who's been in the, understands the IT industry, like where does that, where would you choose between those two, Dave?
I might
or
be
Matt?
I might be in a typical small business without any technical prowess of like an MSP. An MSP has this challenge of Dave is technical, but also understands business and may not be the owner, right? That's not typically the case that you find in most businesses, in my opinion. But let's assume that we're not in that situation where you do have that, and you're now having to choose between that CFO, Matt, to your point, or maybe in their case, an accounting person or the owner, or in my mind, when it's a small business of 20 employees, it's got to be that owner or you'll be fighting uphill for the rest of your life. I don't know that that's always perfect, but they're the ones that have to be okay with their risk posture. They're the ones that took the risk to be in business. And if you outsource that to somebody else, they sure as shit better be empowered. And they better be able to make those decisions and take that ramification. And Dave, I think this will resonate with you of like, if you're going to be the ISO, but every decision you have to make might have to go to an executive, that's not executive support. That's them being the ISO and wanting some separation from that.
Right.
And especially at that hyper small business, I don't know, maybe somebody will make fun of me for this one, but I just don't think you can do this without being the owner. In that small business.
I disagree, because I think in our organization, our owner.
I excluded your type of organization from this world where you have
but I think it comes up more often than we think. I think a lot of times the owner is the entrepreneur, the idea guy, the person that is generating, or a lot of times they're in a sales
I would
role,
mistake that as
right?
I don't know, man. I know where you're going. Continue.
I think someone that is empowered, that's the key, right? They have to be empowered
100%,
and they have to be able to go to the owner and the CEO or whomever and say, this is what we're doing, and the CEO goes, Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
You're running.
I
this.
don't disagree with that statement as a caveat.
Right.
I would just say it's often, maybe it's a 50-50, Dave. Maybe that is the way we look at it is. If it's not the owner, then it needs to be somebody empowered. As I kind of said earlier, it needs to be somebody that understands the business ramifications. And what I'm getting back to is like, as an owner of a company, and I'll credit Michelle Accardi for saying this to me. She said, Matt, I really appreciate everything y'all security people do. But she said, as a CEO, my job is to take risks inherently.
Right.
That's literally what I'm here to do.
Mhm.
Like I take risk and we get paid for that and we profit. Like that's business 101. And she said, the challenge is how do you put this in a way? So to your point, it needs to be the integrator. And if that integrator is the owner and also is the decision maker that has that risk tolerance, then probably that lands more. But I would wager integration and that executive function could be passed off to someone as long as the full support is there. And
Enforcement.
That's tough. Yeah, because it's the enforcement that becomes the challenge. And I think that's the point Zach B makes. And Zach has like similar letters to me and maybe 3 or 4 more. But the point is that like it takes courage to enforce it unless you are the one that's taking the risk and making that risk decision. And then it takes almost no courage to enforce.
But I think I think we're drifting a little bit
Yeah.
here because we're talking about the security officer, not your entire leadership team, not
Sure.
necessarily the CEO or the business vision.
And I guess we are
here.
saying to make them effective, not necessarily to
Thank
name
you.
one.
Exactly.
So I suppose that's a fair point as well.
Yes, that's fair.
Yeah, you don't want to have an ineffective security officer wandering around trying to get things done and just not being able to achieve. And I think that's also what a lot of people are scared of with this
Right.
role, right? Is that
Yeah.
it can seem like an appendage that isn't really kind of, and that's yeah.
You have to have a
You're
good
pointing at me.
relationship with the owner, right?
Yeah, and across a lot. That's what I was
Yeah.
saying. This is personal to me. I've had those good relationships went a long way.
Sure.
But they take time to establish, just like any role inside of an org, right? You bring
Yeah.
in a new CRO, CIO, right? It takes time to establish it.
Well,
But, yeah, it doesn't. It's
I
definitely
wanna
not a
wrap
role
this
that's
up.
needed.
By each of us giving a great example of who and how you might choose an ISO so that we can end this on that positive. We've beaten this to death. And so everybody that's listening, TLDR, really it's go pick somebody. All the things we've talked about are better ways to make them more effective. But really it's about write it down, assign who that is, start finding ways to measure what things need to go to them, what needs to be part of that practice as you build it. But Dave, what do you have to add of how should they go just go pick somebody? Like if you had to just pick right now, how would you do it?
Honestly, go flip a coin. It really truthfully. No, look, guys, I know there's a lot behind this, but here's the other thing: go pick somebody. You can change it.
Yes.
You don't have to stay with. Like if it
I love
doesn't,
you,
if
Dave.
it's not right, go pick somebody else. But
Yeah.
pick someone and start looking at this for real, not somebody else is gonna do that. Pick somebody and start talking about it. Just talk about it, and that will get you on the path and the journey. It doesn't mean you're done. It doesn't mean you're gonna know everything that you know you need to do, and you're not gonna be perfect at it. It's okay. That is why it's a journey and not a checkbox that we got this done. We're done with this. You're never done. You're always working on this. So it can change. It can be a different person. It can be somebody that doesn't know everything. And so long as they're talking about it, I think they're in good shape.
Amen. I love it. Who's next?
I'll go because I want to follow from that because like my mind went to the exact same place, right? It was kind of like fail fast is better than, not doing anything. Something's better than nothing. And then I almost kind of get into this stage of like I start thinking of the mayors in my town, right? They go through this every 4 months, they rotate through. It might just be something that you define as a shared role if you can get good documentation behind it, but give people exposure, let them own it and see where it goes and then reassess in 12 months, something like that.
Yeah,
That can be a
100%.
plan.
And back to your mayoral discussion, could you imagine if a prank train started, how often and much it would escalate as the next mayor rolled into that office every 4 months? Like you could really prank. Anyways, side tangent. All right, Chris, anything else, buddy?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think, we talk about the Trustmark, we talk about having compliance within organizations, and obviously it all revolves around leadership and governance. And I think you said it at the beginning, the will of the company. If you want to start showing evidence and that your company is going in a direction where cybersecurity is important, I think this is a big step in that direction, because it identifies that you've put somebody sort of in charge of overseeing what will develop into a program.
Yeah, 100%. I don't think I can add any more. I think if I was just going to kind of rehash what was said, it is just pick, to Dave's point, fail fast, to Matt's point, and don't be offended that you have to shift that role. Talk about it as maybe a role that'll pivot around the organization, or even a shared role where there's certain amounts of shared responsibility that plays in there. I'm going to bring that up as well, Dave. And then to Chris's point, right, you can build that excellence as time goes. And during that, Bob Miller, which is never surprising when Bob and I agree on something at level like 100, but Bob says, and I don't think I can fit it on here, so I'll just do it real quick and then pop it back down and read it. But Bob says the cross-section of the organization you have to take to be a security officer mandates that they have the authorization. This is, again, that support and direction, as well as the responsibility, right? That they own it, that's theirs, right? Their accountability and responsible to make things happen. Regardless, they have to be the integrator personality types. Maybe that's somewhere where there's some arguability, because this is about quantitatively evaluating the risk, right? Some number or some methodology, whether it be quantitative or qualitative, right? Against business risk tolerance for said risk. They have to be the interpreter of that, wherever that may land. So initially, though, Dave, you're going to find people that get it or don't. Pick somebody and get started now. And you can, if you're going to get any pro level tip from me, it would be make it ISO and then name in a table that can be changed, and you can show it as a change to your document that someone has changed that role, and you've done that as you continue to move forward. So,
and even better, come to one of the Trustmark peer groups, right?
Yeah.
Like if you don't understand something or you're not clear on something, CompTIA literally has so much in the way of resources available.
Yeah.
And I know, Matt, you've been on that call. I know Chris gets on that call often. There's lots of people that will get on that call and contribute if you're stuck and you don't know and you're like, God, what am I supposed to do as an ISO? Hold on, let me get you in there.
Yeah. 100%. I don't want to beleaguer this point, y'all. Please tell me, if you will, if you've watched this and you come back next week and come back next Friday, same time, and let us know who you picked. Don't necessarily give us a name. Keep it OPSEC, boys and girls, but tell us how you picked and who you picked. And if you're already in the chat, let us know, people who watch this evergreen, who you picked, how you picked from a role perspective and how you picked them and whether they aligned with some of the things we were talking about today. And I don't want to miss out another comment coming from Hamza saying sometimes he or they are seen as a threat to business. And I think, to your point, that's where if you do this well, you show that you are actually just driving business along the level of what profit to risk was actually acceptable. And then, good God, Henry Tim, I might drown you sometime. Is ISO an asset? They are a human asset and a role-based asset that must be managed and maintained. Yes.
Assets are next week, Henry. Come on, slow down.
Dang it.
Yeah.
I think all you Degley, I'll take your ISO role, no problem. And now this is probably contractual because we're on a video thing. But
Yeah.
anyways, appreciate everybody. See y'all next week.
See you guys.